Hey everyone, so I hope that you have enjoyed the two latest video features, the float fishing for urban trout and spring kokanee fishery. These two fisheries are widely available across British Columbia in many different lakes and is the ideal fishery for parents to introduce fishing to their kids, for the whole families to participate in, for entry-level anglers, but also for experienced anglers to take advantage of when other fisheries are slower. So in this Gear Talk segment, we'll take a look at what equipment exactly do you need to do float fishing for kokanee and rainbow trout. So the very first thing we'll look at is the spinning rod that I use in this video. Many people ask, well, what brand of spinning rod is it that you're using? Well, most conventional spinning rods in North America, you can buy range between 5 and 7 foot long, especially the lighter spinning rods, the ones that raise between 2 and 6 pound test. They're primarily designed for spin casting, spoons and spinners, by casting and retrieving lures, so they don't really need to be that long. But when I'm float fishing, I really want a longer rod, but still keep it pretty light. So the alternative is to have a spinning rod custom built like this one. This is custom built from a 4-weight fly fishing rod blank, and it actually breaks down into 4 pieces. The rod itself is just over 9 foot long, so when it breaks down it's about 2 foot long, and you can carry it in your backpack when it's wrapped together. And so it's a great travel rod, and I use for float fishing, like you see, for trout, for kokanee. I also use for coarse fishing. I take it to Europe and I do some sea trout fishing on the beach with this rod as well by casting small lures and jigs and spoons and spinners. So it's one of my favorite rods. It's an ideal all-rounder rod for smaller fish. The reason you want to use a longer spinning rod is so you can actually cast your float a little further. You can actually keep your line between the float and the rod off the water surface, so to reduce the amount of line that's sitting on top of the water, to reduce the amount of drag. So when you set the hook, you can actually get a proper hook set. So with the light spinning rods, of course you want to couple with a light spinning reel. So this one here is not too bad. It's a Shimano 2500 series. It's a twin power. It's a European model. The reel that I used in those two videos is actually this one right here, which is the Shimano Sahara 1000. It's a tiny little reel with a small spool, which is fitted with 4-pound test line, and it's one of my favorite reels. It's for anything under 4 pound. It's a really nice reel to use. It's light, together with the light rod and light reel. You don't have to exert as much energy when using it. It's just a really, if you're fishing for smaller fish, you want to go light. Like I said, the fishing line is 4-pound test maxima. Again, if you're fishing for small fish, you don't need to use 8-pound, 12-pound test line. That's just very unnecessary. You want to keep everything light so everything's fairly sensitive. That way you can actually catch more fish. Now let's take a look at the float that we used in this video. So the float is actually the most important part in float fishing. And floats come in many different sizes, many different shapes. So which exactly is the best float that you should use? Well, there isn't one single best float that you can use for all kinds of fish, but for all kinds of conditions and time of the year. Instead, I actually have several different floats with me usually in the box, as you can see over here. So usually I like to carry different floats. You have some skinny floats like that, some slightly bigger ones, and then we have one much bigger one right here. So there are 3 things that I look for when choosing the type of float that I want to use. So the size of the fish. If the fish are really small, you want to use a small float. So small float for small fish, big float for big fish. The floats that we use in the 2 videos takes about 6 to 8 grams of weight to balance, and that's generally what you're looking for. A float that's bigger than that that takes about 15 to 20 grams weight to balance. That's more ideal for salmon. If you use a bigger float, the buoyancy is bigger and the small fish wouldn't be able to pull that float down and you wouldn't be able to see the bite. So you want to stick with a small float. The second thing that you look for is the condition of the water where you're fishing. If the water is very calm, it's very flat, then you want to use a small float because it's very sensitive. You can spot the float right away on the flat surface. On the other hand, if the water is fairly choppy because of the wind, you want to use a slightly bigger float because it's more stable. It sits more stably in the water. It just stands out a little bit better when there are a bit of waves in the water. The third thing is, how far do you want to cast that float? So if you use a small float like that, which is what I use on the first day in the in the float fishing for urban trout video, it's very small. It doesn't take much weight to balance, so you can't cast as far. So the mistake that I made was that I tried to cast as far as possible with this small float, and when I did that, the line actually tangled up, and that ended up to be pretty unsuccessful for that evening. So the following evening, I came back with a slightly bigger float, which requires more weight to balance, which means I can cast slightly further out than using the small float. So this float, because I can cast further, I can reach the fish. It works a lot better for that particular occasion. So it really depends on the size of fish that you're catching, whether the water is choppy or not, and how far you want to cast your float. So keep those factors in mind when choosing a float, and definitely have a wide selection with you in the box. So what I usually carry is a box like this with several different floats in one compartment, and this box you can get in any dollar store. So it has a longer compartment for floats. You have the smaller compartments for little weights, and I usually carry a few swivels and a few beads, and of course the hooks. The hooks that I use is all-purpose hooks. It's the size 6 or 8, which works great for these trout and kokanee. And the trout and kokanee that we catch, usually between 12 inches long up to 16 inches. So the mouth typically are pretty small. So a smaller hook works best. So the terminal setup is pretty simple. So what I have is just a fixed float on the main line and down to a sliding weight and the bead, and at the end of the main line a swivel is tied on, so this bead and the sinker, the weight, it actually slides down and sits on top of the swivel, and at the other end of the swivel I have a leader tied about just over 1 foot long down to the hook, and that float depth is usually kept at between 4 and 6 foot long. And again, that's another reason why you want to have a longer spinning rod, so you can actually adjust that fixed float all the way up if you need to do it. The bait that we use in this video is krill, and many people ask, where can you get krill? Well, in British Columbia, krill is actually available at most tackle stores. Various Baiting Tackle in Richmond, it's usually my supplier. That's usually where I get my bait. And they don't actually come in this color. This is actually, the krill actually comes in yellow. That's the natural color. And what happens is I like to grab a jar of Powski 5Q, the red 5Q, and just sprinkle it with that in here and let it sit for a couple hours, and it will turn into that color. And believe me, it actually works a lot better than natural color. It stands out in the water, and it actually has a bit more scent when using it, so it attracts the fish a lot more. And of course, you gotta have a rag, because this stuff here is very, very smelly. You want to wipe your hand every time if you want to stay socially popular. So there you have it. So float fishing for urban trout and kokanee. It's a very, very simple way of catching them. All you need is a fairly long spinning rod. You gotta have your selection of floats, weights, hooks, and a spool of fishing line, and of course your krill. And with all that, you just have to get out there and try it, And don't forget your fishing license. If you want to fish in any rivers and lakes in British Columbia, you got to have a valid freshwater fishing license, which expires every year on March 31st. So April 1st is coming up. Make sure to renew it before heading out. And until next time, good luck fishing.